Good evening and welcome to the November 25th, 2013 meeting of the Richmond Community Schools Board of School Trustees. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first of all, we're going to have the reading of our mission statement.
Our mission statement: Richmond Community Schools will graduate students who are literate, responsible, proficient in state and national standards, and college and career ready.
Thank you, Erin. And now our vision statement, Dixie.
By 2020, Richmond Community Schools will be the highest performing school system in East Central Indiana.
Thank you, Dixie. And now we are ready for our public commentary. And we have two public commentaries, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end of the meeting. And do we have anyone signed up?
We do. We have Carol Bailey.
Okay, Carol.
I am so much more terrified than I thought I would be. So I have everything written out word for word because I knew I would go blank.
Would you please identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Carol Bailey from Richmond. My husband and I are parents of 3 Richmond High School graduates, 2005, 2006, 2010, all of whom were involved in band and or choir during their years at high school. And to further my bias, our 2 daughters have continued their music study in college. Our youngest will graduate this spring from Franklin College with a minor in music, and our older daughter graduated with a bachelor's from Michigan State and a master's from Indiana University in clarinet performance. And I'm happy to say, thankfully, that she's living just above the poverty level and will be paying off her student loans for the rest of her life. But she's very happy, and we're very, very, very proud of her. I'm also the piano teacher of 3 wonderful RHS sophomore girls, all of whom are not only musically talented, but not surprisingly academically at the top of their class. And it is for them that I decided to come here to speak to you tonight. 2 of my 3 students who have been playing cello and clarinet in orchestra and band since 6th grade are unable to participate this trimester due to scheduling conflicts. The 3rd student was able to stay in band only by arranging an independent study for an honors class, and they are by no means the only students affected. In the orchestra, the numbers have dropped from 33 first trimester to 26 second trimester. This is a 21% decrease, which I was able to figure out despite not having calculus in high school. Thank you. In band, the clarinet section alone has dropped from 15 to 10 players. And in every section, students have indicated that they have encountered problems in scheduling, many of them dropping AP or honors classes in order to remain in band. What are the consequences of these decreases? Numbers alone mean a less balanced group. But more than that, the vast majority of students not in band and orchestra this trimester are among the best musicians in their respective groups. The musicianship and leadership that they have brought to younger, less experienced, and less proficient players is now absent. Additionally, musicians who rehearsed first trimester for a December concert will not perform in that concert. Less polished, less balanced band will. When they return 3rd trimester, if they're able to make it work in their schedules, it will almost be time for the ISMA contest. And once again, the makeup and balance of the group will change, and players will have little time to prepare and adjust to this new band. This is a music director's nightmare. Music programs cannot grow and thrive with students popping in and out of them. The mistake, I feel, appears to be the consideration of performing arts groups as single trimester electives rather than year-long class offerings. And then another negative result then is students who choose to opt out of band during concert season because they really just want to be in marching band. I don't know of any other school district in the area that allows this. Band is band, orchestra is orchestra, choir is choir. You're either in it or you're not in it. And I want to make the story a little bit more personal now. One of my students, after multiple visits to her guidance counselor, including one that was instigated by me, which I now feel terrible about because I just ended up causing her more grief, has ended up this trimester with only 2 academic classes and 3 electives, none of which she really wanted to take, and still no band. This is a student whose parents and grandparents have sacrificed greatly to pay for her piano lessons, her instrumental lessons, a good instrument, all so that she can develop her musical skills and be a part of a performing group with the goal of majoring in music in college. Instead, not only is she not in band, she also technically cannot perform her Group 1 piano solo at Solo Ensemble this February because the rules clearly state that all pianists must be members of a performance group at the time. And I don't want to be the one to tell her that she can't play the piece that she's been working on since August at contest. I believe that this school system values the arts. I've heard it expressed many times by this board. But is a strong performing arts program a priority? Do we pay it more than lip service? I find it really hard to believe that this problem was not foreseen, and if it was, why it was not addressed earlier. I understand that a scheduling change is on the table, but that will happen next year at the earliest, and in the meantime, are you willing to let the music programs continue their downward slide and to keep these serious young musicians from pursuing their passion? So I'm wondering if we can come up with something to bridge the gap, and I'm very willing to offer my suggestions for that. In the push for STEM, S-T-E-M, please, please, please don't forget the arts. There are always going to be students who want to be artists and musicians and even English majors. We all know from personal experience and from absolutely every study that's ever been conducted what a huge part the arts play in students' lives, socially, culturally, and academically. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, Dr. Borff, continue with public commentary, please.
We have 2 very special presentations tonight, or appearances, that I would like to talk about. One was a kind of a last-minute change to our agenda, but it certainly wasn't last minute in preparation. We have received a special bequest, and we have Mr. George Sowers here tonight representing the family of Mary, or actually the estate of Mary Elizabeth Powers. And maybe I'll let him talk about this bequest and what it means to students at Richmond High School.
Thank you, Dr. Borff. President Morgeson, members of the board, administration, staff, and their counsel. He's important. Was my privilege and pleasure to know Mary Elizabeth Powers for many years. And in 2002, she created a trust. She and her husband had married during their middle ages, as they'd both been widowed. And they were married for quite a long time. Mary had no children of her own, and she valued her stepchildren, and she remembered them in her estate and then also out of her trust. But she also made several charitable gifts out of her trust, and I happened to end up as the successor trustee of that trust, so it's my pleasure to be here tonight. And she made a gift to the Richmond Community Schools for scholarships for Richmond High School students who wanted to take the nursing program at IU East. Now, that's rather narrow, but she had a special interest in that, and that's what she wanted. So I was able to send a check to Ron Cross on its way to this board in September for $43,999.12. The good news is we kept back a reserve until we established all our balance of expenses and taxes, and I'm able to bring with me tonight an additional check, not so large, for $897.07.
Nice.
She was married to Fred Powers Sr., and for those of you who have been around a long time like myself, Fred was the
founder and owner of the original Powerhouse Restaurant.
Yes.
I looked it up today at 431 East Main Street. It was a block away from the courthouse. All the politicians hung out there. I remember going in as a high school student and seeing Joe Cloud, our state rep, hanging out there talking to Fred and everyone else in the restaurant. So she was married to Fred Sr., and that Powerhouse, I don't know when it started. I know, having grown up on a farm, my dad actually sold beef to Fred Powers early on for that Powerhouse. So it's sort of special for me to be able to be here tonight and to recognize Mary Powers and her gift to the school, and to bring the second check to you of $897.07. I do have a couple receipts attached to it, one for each check. I don't need that tonight, but at some point I would appreciate getting that back. And so I would like to deliver this check. President Morgeson, would you like the check?
I sure would. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you for allowing me to present it.
Thanks for
Thank you.
coming.
And at this point, it would be appropriate for the board to formally accept this gift as you do all donations.
Motion made by Aaron Stevens,
Second.
seconded by Suzanne Darengowski. Comments, questions? Aaron?
Well, it's sad. It's sad, but I think it's very, I think we're blessed and honored to receive that from the Powers family, because I remember some of the original powerhouses and those restaurants throughout the city when I was little and growing up. But, you know, again, that's a family, that's an individual who never lost sight of the importance of education in our community and remained connected to Richmond Community Schools well into her age. And I think we're very honored to receive that.
And the students that will benefit from this generous donation. Ron?
Yeah, I think one point needs to be made, and George is much too modest, but I think obviously this was the action of Ms. Powers, but I think anytime an attorney is in a position to confer with a client without unduly influencing them, but is receptive to the notion that as they develop their testamentary scheme, their estate plan, if you will, there can be an opportunity for benevolent bequest, then that attorney is doing a service not only to the client but to the community. And I think George and those in the community in our bar, I think, do a commendable job of that, and I think we should not be remiss in thanking George for adequately expressing the wishes of his client, and we're the beneficiary for those wishes. So thank you, George.
Any other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you again.
Our next one is a special guest. Go ahead.
Before we go on, did I miss, usually when we do public commentary, we explain the process. Did we explain the process to Ms. Bailey, that our lack of response is not lack of
She-
response?
She
Okay.
is aware of that,
Okay,
yes.
because I wanted to make sure, because we were all sitting here so stoically before we.
Thank you.
The next item on our public commentary is a special visit from a member of the State Board of Education, Dr. Brad Oliver.
If you would come forward, please. And on behalf of the board and the administration, we want to sincerely thank you for taking your time to come this evening and to let us be heard. So I'm going to turn it over to back over to Dr. Borf, and he's going to kind of let us guide us through this. And Dr. Borf.
Well, I'd also like to welcome you this evening. We're privileged, I think, to have a member of the State Board here. Last few months have been filled with news accounts of how the State Board, the DOE, the Governor's Office have responded to tensions resulting from a number of things. What we don't want to do is have a discussion here tonight that replays all that has been so well documented. We feel that there's blame and responsibility that could go around to everybody, and we're not here to do that. What we would like to hear about tonight would be, from this point forward, how does the state board, and I recognize you don't speak necessarily for the state board, but how do you, as a member of the state board, and if you can speak about the whole group, how are they prepared to move forward constructively with our state superintendent, with the important task that you have of supporting public education? We would like to hear something about that.
Sure. Well, Dr. Borf and President Morganson, members of the board, and certainly the teachers, staff, parents, community members that are here, administration, thank you very much for the invitation. And I want to first of all acknowledge when I received your message, I particularly sat up and took notice. I'm one of the newest board members. I just started in July, but I happen to be the representative of the 6th Congressional District that represents Richmond on the board. And so I immediately reached out to Superintendent Borf and indicated that I would welcome an opportunity if I could to avail myself. I wanted you to meet me in person, and as you mentioned, things have been well documented. It's really hard to get to know people unless you meet them face to face. And I'm a passionate educator, was an elementary teacher, elementary principal, served in 2 central office administrations, one in Twin Lakes, and the other one up the road, a place called Muncie that you guys beat up on in basketball the entire 4 years I was there. But have been privileged to work with students my whole entire career. In fact, now I serve as the unit head up at Indiana Wesleyan preparing teachers. And so very passionate about that in terms of the work that I'm going to be able to do at the board. But it has been with some challenges, and passionate people sometimes lose their way. And we've had some interesting things happen in terms of elections. And with that came the election of a new governor who's very passionate about career and technical education and has a vision for how he wants to accomplish that. The election of a new state superintendent who's very passionate that we get back to putting students first, and many of us share her vision and want a chance to work with her on that. And then also in all of that mix, we have some challenges handed to us, some opportunities, I'll use that word, from the General Assembly, such as the adoption of college and career readiness standards, trying to revamp A to F accountability in light of what obviously is not, in my opinion, a very fair system. We've had some excellent work done by the A to F accountability panel, and we've seen some forward motion on that. But in all that, what has been lacking is some clear meeting procedures and a clear decorum to our meetings. And so I think anytime you have passionate people and you put them in a room and there's not clarity around a set of meeting procedures, you begin to see some of the things happen. And so the lack of communication, those things have surfaced in those meetings. With respect to how we move forward, just before I came in, I was pleased to receive a message from Superintendent Ritz. Our next board meeting is on December the 4th. Some of you are aware that Governor Pence reached out to Superintendent Ritz recently and offered the help of the National Association of School Boards of Education. And they are actually, according to the email I just received from Superintendent Ritz, her and Governor Pence are meeting tomorrow to talk specifically about meeting procedures. I've worked with boards for 15 years as a teacher, principal, school administrator, and one of the things I have found is that I've worked with all kinds of people from all different walks of life, all different political spectrums, but if you have a clear set of meeting procedures and you have a sense of mutual respect and you work at relationship, building those relationships, you can get a lot done. I believe that to be true of the State Board of Education, but we have lacked that. When I came on in July, I was handed what I thought was the meeting procedures that were adopted in May of 2013, and I have yet to see us actually follow those meeting procedures. And as a new board member, the frustration lies simply in not knowing for certain how do we advance things. We have procedures that say the chair can set an agenda item. We have in that same set of procedures language that says 3 board members can bring that forward. And I'm sure this board can appreciate, the time and energy you put into preparing for your board meetings. We put in a similar amount of time. The issues are very real. We know that students' futures hang in the balance. We all take it very serious, but it's very challenging to do the work when there's misunderstandings. And what you've seen surface in the meetings have less to do, in my opinion, with the issues in as much as procedurally how we get things done. And so that's going to be very important. I think the other thing that will help with NASB's assistance is clarifying the roles of the State Board and the roles of the Department of Education. We have 2 separate entities by statute. If you read that, you'll see very clearly that the State Board of Education is charged by statute with setting education policy in the state of Indiana. It's laid out very clearly what the duties of the school board are. It's also laid out in statute, very different duties for the Department of Education, which is the enforcement arm. And what makes Indiana unique, and it is the only state like this, where the elected state superintendent not only serves as the chief state school officer and the enforcement arm of the Department of Education, she also serves as the 11th voting member and the chair of the state board, which is highly unusual. In fact, we're the only state in the union that operates like that. And that's not to say whether that's good or bad, but she has a very challenging task because on one hand, she has to enforce policy, and on the other one, she's part of a group of 10 governor-appointed members, and also is an 11th voting member and the chair of the board. And so those procedures become really important when you have that kind of dynamic. So the governor will meet tomorrow, and they are going to be discussing procedures. We have set aside December 4th for a meeting with NASB. That meeting will be a public meeting, and it will be dedicated specifically to work through that role clarification and where the duties and the boundary lines of that separation exist. And then we actually have to come back in the session on December the 20th because it's necessary for us to set final A to F letter grades so that we get that done before the first of the year so we don't put our federal interest in education at stake in terms of our waiver and other funding that we would receive. So with that, I'll open it up to specific questions.
Anyone from the board wish to ask?
I'll be nice.
Okay.
I'm interested in how you can work with the legislature to get the kind of support that public schools, especially those like ourselves and like Muncie, urban school situations, because we're really compared almost on the playing field with other people who have fewer challenges than we might have. So talk about how the board works with the legislators to help those of us in District 6.
Yeah, I would say this. Let me preference it this way. I would say, and I'm sure this is the case here, is it's so critically important that you work with your locally elected legislators, even more so than the board's interaction with them. The board's interaction, honestly, is quite limited. The board, as a policy-setting body, is oftentimes handed things by the legislator and told, go figure this out. That's what's happened with HEA, House Enrolled Act 1427. They've turned to us and said, we want an evaluation of the standards done. We want you to adopt college and career readiness standards by July 1st. We want you to revamp A to F. I'm sure I'm missing about 5 or 6 other major things they've asked us to do. But there are opportunities for interaction, and so I personally, I've actually asked for a meeting with Speaker Bosma. I'm trying to get that arranged right now to help him understand some of the challenges going on up in my hometown, which is Muncie, Indiana. We're being impacted drastically right now by the impact of circuit breaker legislation, and that's not to say that the legislature doesn't understand it, but it is a complex thing to explain to the public. But they understand this: when you don't have school buses, they sit up and start taking notice very quickly, and there's a lot of questions. So I think the way that we best work with the legislature is helping to help them understand what's in front of them. I had the opportunity last year to actually run for the State House, and it was both a good and, I won't say bad, but a good and interesting experience. The frightening side of it was finding out just the overall scope of topics that come before an elected official. What's more frightening is when they're trying to wrestle through something as complex as some of the education statutes, and they lack the knowledge and experiential base to really understand what's in front of them. And then they start to look inside their party, within their caucus, to figure out where that expertise lies. And I think it becomes very incumbent upon school leaders, and I know Dr. Borf has been very good about this, of building those relationships so that you have a credibility and you earn the right to be heard. And so I would say to you, at this point on the state board, I am actually really thrilled that right now we exist at a time when there's a number of educators, more so than ever right now, in the State Board of Education. And I say that to you because if you look at the recent appointments by Governor Pence, many of us have been involved in education for a number of years and have that knowledge and experiential base. If we can put meeting procedures in place and work together, I really do believe we can advance some things forward that are going to be very beneficial to students. But I'm more hopeful, more optimistic, despite what's been documented and printed. I hear people use the words, it's been contentious. Well, in moments when you capture that 30-second soundbite or video clip, it probably looks that way, but that's out of about a 6-hour meeting where a lot of good work was done, but maybe it wasn't necessarily as reported on. So I trust that you all watch the videos and that you see what's going on, that you're staying abreast, and I certainly want to be accessible to you, and that's why I'm here.
Aaron?
Well, following up on a comment that you had made in regards to working with our legislators, it brings up something of great concern to me, and that is the fact that it appears now that we are getting to a point that so much of the decision-making process is being factored by our political affiliations across party lines, it seems like. You know, whether it be some of the current tensions between the State Board of Education and the superintendent, or other issues that legislators are trying to manage when it comes to public education. And I have the great concern because, you know, as we can talk with our legislators, our elected officials, are they going to be hearing us, earnestly hearing us, or are they going to be, you know, listening to us and then falling back on the party line or what is dictated by, you know, the parties that be? I say that, you know, I've been a lifelong Republican, yet at the same time, you know, my concerns right now are the powers that be right now going to eventually erode the importance of public education in the state of Indiana. You know, we cannot afford to let that happen. And following up with that is the fact too, you know, the greater concern right now is, are we going to, in the future, be going to a partisan election when it comes to public education, to our public school boards? Because if that is, then I feel that's a step back instead of a step forward in the right process when it comes to securing the importance, again, maintaining the security of public education in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, let me make a couple comments, and I appreciate your thoughts because I actually share many of them. I actually, over the last 4 to 5 years, I didn't know how I might have an opportunity to have influence at the state level, but I was very concerned watching what was happening as ed reforms were being put forward, particularly in 2010 as a part of the Putting Students First legislative package. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I do believe that there are a number of reforms that were needed. I could see some things firsthand in central office that concern me with where we were headed. But I think any time education swings in either direction, either kind of a polarizing adult-centered position on education that doesn't put the needs of students first, you can get very bad education policy. And what I saw happening that bothered me more than anything is that we were pushing reforms forward, and the rhetoric that was being used to do it, I think, left a bad taste in many educators' minds and in their thoughts, and certainly they expressed themselves at the voting box last November. And I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to get well. We have to restore relational trust with our teachers. My biggest concern right now with the entire legislative efforts is that we have got to recognize that what has happened is we've actually contributed to a culture that's centered on testing in our schools. That's not healthy, and I don't think I'm going to have to make a hard case for that here. But what I see happen as I'm out in schools is instead of the focus being on learning being the dominant culture, testing's the dominant culture. And the outgrowth of that is a spirit of compliance rather than a spirit of fostering and cultivating the conditions under which children discover their deeply hidden human talent. And so with respect to that, all I can say to you is this, is that as we begin to work with legislatures, I am actually starting to see movement. I'm getting more requests for information. I'm being given more opportunities to engage lawmakers and talk about these things to try and find a healthy balance that says the reality of it is that Indiana is leading on a number of achievement factors. We're leading in AP, we're leading in I-STEP growth, we're leading in NAEP scores. It's not just one or two metrics we're leading at. So we can't say, hey, throw everything out, it was all totally wrong. And at the same time, too, we can't go forward believing that there are some things that can't be improved, because they can be. And there were some things that were done, quite honestly, hastily. Some metrics were selected because they were easy and we could get to the data. And that's not an excuse for doing it that way. If it's complex and requires us to sit back and look at it and examine it, that's what we're supposed to be doing as a board. I believe those things are happening. I did hear on the way here, ironically, I heard some of our legislative leaders talking that they'd like to see this be a lighter session for education. We'll see. That'll be interesting to see if that materializes. But I personally hope that the legislature wants to engage. I would really like to see them take on this issue of early childhood education if we really want to get serious about it. I really am very supportive of some of the governor's initiatives around career and technical education. I'm particularly concerned right now that we have an 8% unemployment rate that just went down to 7.5%. But what concerns me about it, if you look at the jobs that are there, there's a number of them for which we don't have qualified workers to put in those positions. And it has great implications for what we may be able to do around additional career readiness. And for a while, at least when I was in central office, that was 2004 through 2008, you saw this big push for college readiness. And there's nothing wrong with that, but what has resulted, and this is what's happening, is we have students that are going to school for 4 years. 75% of them are graduating with $25,000 in debt, and it's simply an unsustainable model, and many of them could get into the workforce much faster. And so I'm for innovating some of those things. I'd like to see the board focus there, and I think there's bipartisan interest in seeing that happen, including Superintendent Ritz being a part of that. I would just say this, stay tuned. I know you're seeing a lot play out. But I do think we're finally on the right path. We've cleared up some misunderstandings. I've said this in the public meeting. I would love to see the board have a retreat and talk. I haven't even had that since I came on the board. I mean, 3 meetings in, and we were off into a litigation situation that shut down all communication. And you know how hard it is to prepare for a meeting. Try doing that when you can't talk to each other. And I'm not here to cry about that, but I'm just here to say it's been a challenging start, but I am still optimistic. We have dedicated men and women, including our state superintendent, who are committed to try and get this right. And I think she'll have a good meeting tomorrow. I think you'll see us have a good meeting on the 4th, and you'll see us slowly start moving forward. But we have to respect each other, and we have to build relationships, not just in these settings, but outside of these settings. We have to build those relationships.
So what do you need from us?
What did I need from you? Honestly, I need your willingness to reach out to your superintendent. If you see something that you're not certain what's going on, send us a note. I so appreciated getting that letter for a couple
We
reasons.
can handle that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in all seriousness, it matters. It expresses your passion. It says that you care enough to say, hey, we see this, and we don't, you weren't judgmental in what you sent.
No.
You were very factual about, we're bored, we're working, here's some of the things that have been successful, and I want to congratulate you on your successes here in Richmond. And I took it as a form of encouragement to say, listen, we need the state board to do what it's statutorily obligated to do. We need you to lead. And I hope my coming tonight is a way of saying to you, thank you, and I take that very seriously. And when we have our opportunity for public comment on December 4th, I certainly will acknowledge your letter and make certain that I express to the state superintendent and the rest of the board how much I appreciate being able to come and address you. But I think what I need from you is just to reach out, not to rush to judgment. The things that upset me the most, and this does concern me, and I'll share this with you, and I'm not saying this came out of Richmond, it's kind of happening from all over the state, is that passionate people sometimes, they jump into the rhetoric before they really get their facts in order. And I understand that. I've been at this for a while, and I certainly can read a letter that's, kind of expressing frustration. But I would just say this, I've been very deeply concerned by the lack of professional disposition in some of the messages I see, particularly coming from our educators. And I know they're hurting, I know they're frustrated, I know that they're going, this isn't fair, and I totally understand that. But as somebody who prepares teachers, can I just tell you that if we're not careful, we will actually hurt ourselves in the future by discouraging people from entering the profession. One of the things that I do as an education unit head and a dean is I read the surveys of pre-service teachers that are just coming back in from student teaching. And I have to tell you, about 4 out of every 10 that I read, they're having second guesses about whether or not they want to go into the profession. That concerns me. I hear people all the time talking about the number of teachers retiring, and we should be concerned about a teacher shortage. That's the lagging indicator. The leading indicator you should look at is the number of students, the few number of students that are enrolling in teacher preparation programs. There will be a teacher shortage in Indiana. And I'm just simply saying, as we work through some of these issues, and some of it is political, there's no question. Some of it is philosophical. But regardless, if we don't get back to putting students first and put our passions around that thing that we do, unlike any other place in the world, and I can tell you, I travel many, many countries, there is no other place that has a system of education like the United States. And celebrate what we're doing, because we ought to be celebrating right now, not debating. There's a lot of great things happening. We're going to hurt ourselves long-term in the future by discouraging several young men and women from going in what I think is the best profession in the world, which is teaching and making a difference. So I would just say to you, whatever you can do on that front to keep teachers positive, to hold us accountable like you have done, and when we need to be called out, call us out. Hopefully that won't be too often. but I appreciate being able to come and share with you.
I do have a question. It would appear to some of us who are watching from a distance that the state board is now answering to two different organizations, or maybe not answering to them, but addressing two different organizations. I mean, we've seen instances where the state board has actually turned to an attorney from the organization that has been appointed by the governor, as opposed to turning to attorneys within the Department of Education. What is the relationship that the board has?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me try to clear that up, because I've seen people use the term, there's a shadow board now, and there are now two boards, and there's not two boards. There's a single state board of education. For years, the state board of education, and some of you will know this in the room, has always been resourced, but it's been resourced through the Department of Education's budget. It's had its own executive director. It's had its own board council. They were always considered DOE employees because that's where the legislature put the resources to fund those positions. In the last budget, prior to my coming on the board in July, the decision was made to move those resources out of the Department of Ed budget and move it over to the governor's office in anticipation of the creation of a Center for Education and Career Innovation. A number of governors around the United States are seeing this issue going on in the workforce, where they need to innovate new alternative pathways for students who may not be college readiness bound, but may be looking at a career track. The concept essentially was this: you have the State Board of Education as an entity, the Indiana Education Roundtable, and then we have the creation now of the Works Council and the Career Council. And the idea was to try and leverage resources across those four entities rather than them operating as silos within government. And that happens sometimes, so that we have different boards with different resources, each with their own director, each with their own council. And I think what got lost in that confusion is that when Governor Pence created the Center for Education and Career Innovation through executive order, a lot of people saw that as basically taking something from the Department of Ed, when in reality it always belonged to the school board. It was resourced to the Department of Ed. And so inside that CECI staff, the board still has two primary positions. We have an executive director, that's Ann Davis, and we have board counsel, which is Michelle McCown, who actually represents the full school board, including Superintendent Ritz. But what has been confusing is that we've had DOE counsel sitting at the table with us, who's been advising the superintendent. And I think that's where NASB is going to have to help us. And I do feel for Superintendent Ritz, because on one hand, she's thinking as the state chief school officer. On the other hand, we're saying, but you're one of us as a part of the board, and board has its counsel. And so that's what you're going to have to see us kind of work through as understanding that. But clearly the needs there, whether it's resourced out of the Department of Ed or resourced out of the governor's office, we all work full-time jobs. And the analysis that's done by that staff is absolutely critical. You know the issues that come before you, so you can multiply that at a state level when we're talking about related statutes, when we're talking about the need to go seek out information. There is no way any single board member, including the superintendent, could put that information together in a way we could digest it to be able to conduct effective business. And so I think that's some of the confusion, Superintendent Borf, and I think it's going to be incumbent upon the governor's office and CECI, and they're trying to do this, to get out and explain what their role is. One of the things that I intend to talk to our speaker and other legislative leaders about is that if CECI is something we believe is valuable from an economy of scale of leveraging resources, probably a better way to approach that is to somehow legislatively clarify what are their roles and responsibilities, just as we have statute that says this is the responsibilities of the department, these are the responsibilities of the board. But right now, I can assure you, they simply work in a resource capacity to the state board. But you are seeing where you can have a statute and DOE council sees it one way and the board council sees it one way, and the rest of us are sitting there going, okay, which is it? And that's what you're seeing going on there.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask one more thing,
Sure.
and then we need to let you go. We've taken
Thank you.
a lot of your time here. What role does the state board play with vouchers and charter schools?
Yeah, the board is responsible essentially for all education policy, including working through the rules right now. If you read that section of the statute, it's very clear that the state board is responsible for setting up the rules by which public dollars flow, either through the Choice Scholarship Program or through the vouchers. And right now, since I've been on the board, we have not touched that. So the existing rules that existed, those are the rules we're still operating under. The only emergency rule that we've been a part of so far has been the one related to special education dollars and how those flow through on a choice scholarship. And one of the things that I was very concerned about, but we seem to work through, at least in an emergency rule, is when you do that, is holding those schools accountable to still follow Article 7, particularly when you have questions about services and hearings and protecting the rights of those students. That's only an emergency rule. You'll see a number of those things come back through formal rulemaking, and we'll have to hammer some of that out. But the board does play a role in that, and so I think it's fair to say, as concerns exist here about vouchers or about the school choice scholarship, at this point, since it's already been legislated, the appropriate body to write to is the board members, myself included, to express your views and say, as these things come forward, this is how we want to see those things addressed. The larger statutory constructs around that, obviously, you're going to go through your representative and your state senator.
That's the next letter?
Yeah,
Yes,
I think
it's always a
so.
letter.
I hope you'll come back.
Again, I want to just say thank you. I thought it would be good for you to meet me and hear my heart. I've been an educator. I had a few classes with this gentleman, who's your superintendent, and we got through those together at Ball State. But it's always great. My wife's family is from Richmond, and she had an aunt that was a teacher here in the Richmond schools. So
Who was that?
Cecilia Spicer, she was a physical education
Oh,
teacher.
yes.
Yeah, so Aunt Cecilia and Uncle Louie, that's part of our family. So we get down this way. We still have, my wife's family still has a few aunts and uncles left. It was a rather large family. So thank you all so very much, and I appreciate it. And if it would be all right with you, I will excuse myself and head back to Muncie and spend a little time with my kids this evening, and appreciate the work that
Absolutely.
you're doing.
Well, we really thank you for coming, and your words were encouraging, and you clarified some things for us, and you will probably be hearing from us again.
Okay, well, thank you for what you do for the children here at Richmond Schools. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are ready to move on to reports and discussion topics.
Our first discussion topic has to do with the school calendar. And I would like to begin with a PowerPoint that summarizes some conversation we had at our last board meeting during a work session. So,
Misty usually turns the lights.
it's turned down.
And it just, they did.
If you recall, at our last board meeting, we had a work session in which we divided the group into two different groups. One discussed the calendar, the other one discussed enrollment and special purpose schooling. Enrollment / special purpose schooling. The session on calendar, I'd like to preface this by saying that in the work sessions on calendar, a great deal of the conversation also focused on scheduling and trimester versus semester. While that conversation would have a whole lot to do with the issues brought to us tonight, I'd like to focus just on the calendar, because we're also going to talk about some calendar designs. So, in this work session, one of the questions was the balanced calendar. What is it? And we're not suggesting that we're going to be talking about a balanced calendar, but it's a term that's been thrown around across the state and beyond. What is it? Well, basically there are two pieces. One would be there are extended breaks that you don't find in a traditional calendar, and there is a shorter summertime. The shorter summertime doesn't necessarily amount to a significant shorter summer, but there is an appreciably shorter length of summer. The calendars that we're going to be talking about tonight have to do with a start time of approximately 1 week earlier, early August, as opposed to second or third week of August. A fall recess of 1 week instead of 2 days, but our fall recess would happen much earlier in October. The one that you see in a traditional calendar takes the place of what used to be called Teachers Institute, and that always happened at the tail end of October. We've seen as Teachers Institute no longer exists, we've seen the fall break take its place. The Thanksgiving break in these calendars would be 1 week. The holiday winter break would be a 2-week, not unlike what we see today. But the spring break could either be 1 or 2 weeks, and the end of the year would be 1, maybe even 2 weeks later. Now, what are the advantages of this type of calendar? One of the reasons we've not jumped into the fray when it comes to developing a balanced calendar was that for many different conversations, we've taken the position that if something does not have a positive impact on student achievement, then let's not go there. The shorter summer break would have to really be shorter to eliminate the summer learning loss that takes place for many students. In fact, research says that if a break is much longer than 3 weeks, then you might as well be out 3 months. Learning loss happens very drastically once you go beyond 3 weeks. So reducing a summer to 7 weeks, 8 weeks, that is not going to affect the summer learning loss. And that's what's driven some of our thinking. But just recently, thanks to some conversations with superintendents in districts where they have had the balanced calendar, one of the conversations that seems to have risen to the surface is not necessarily student achievement, but teacher and student attendance seems to be better. Now, we're not saying that it's a drastic improvement, but it does seem to be the case that student attendance is impacted and teacher attendance is impacted. Mrs. Stewart, what have you found through your research just recently?
I contacted school districts in and around Richmond schools areas, the schools that are adjacent to us, as well as a group of schools in Indianapolis in what is called the Donut area, the township schools. And they had seen some slight improvement in staff and student attendance. It's definitely positively impacted staff morale, is what I continued to hear over and over. Another school district said the results weren't significant, they were slightly better in terms of attendance. And I spoke with one school district that had tried an experiment with both calendars running at the same time. And once they went to, now they call it a balanced calendar, but it's really a modified traditional calendar. And once they went to that modified traditional with many of the same criteria that we had listed up there, they don't want to ever go back to the traditional calendar or they went, I think, maybe 45 days on, 3 weeks off. And they just really like what they're doing now. But improved attendance, not significantly improved. The big deal was the morale.
What about student attendance?
Student attendance improved to some degree also.
Now, if you look at staff attendance, obviously having teachers in front of those classrooms as often as we can have them in front of the classrooms is a real advantage. We know that teachers are very effective and we want them in front of their students. There's also a financial piece. Mr. Coddington took a quick look at this at my request and can tell you a day and then some cost and percentage improvements.
Yes. If if we saved 1 day per teacher, it would save the school corporation just in subs of $27,676. And if we made a 1% improvement, it would save in sub pay $49,816.
Which is the bulk of another teacher's salary. So And what we also believe is that if we have teachers more consistently in front of students, we will see higher student achievement. Now, the you heard me say that this calendar does not reduce the summer enough to create a minimal learning loss. It does reduce summer break. I don't know if that's an advantage or not, but it does reduce that. It also provides, because you have some longer breaks during different portions of the year, it does create opportunities for remediation. It also creates opportunities for students to make college admissions preparations, whether that's seeking scholarships or admission or going on college visitation. Because there are some opportunities throughout the year for that, they're not as inclined to take actual student days in classes. We can find time for enriching and engaging during those 2-week breaks, offering full-day activities, options for students, and extended field trips. Now, that's not to say that we can provide everything for all students, but it does provide more flexibility than we currently have at this point. The challenges in planning a calendar of this nature, and this was brought out in the conversation during our last board meeting, struggling to get it all in. What about band? What about 4-H? There are a number of, if you start earlier, if you end later, there are issues such as employment opportunities for teachers, employment opportunities for students too. You also have to consider during those breaks what that does to the I-STEP and the ECA schedules. Those are fairly immovable. We would have to operate around that. Childcare during the breaks would also pose a problem for many of our parents. Now, that's not insurmountable, because one of the things that we could do is communicate with our community partners to provide opportunities for that. In some districts where they have the long fall break, we've even seen vacation Bible school take place. And instead of just during the summer, it's through the winter. It might happen in the spring. So there are innovative ways that we might find some of our partners answering the need. I had a conversation with Bruce Daggy today at the Boys and Girls Club, and we talked about the impact of the schedule on the Boys and Girls Club. That would be a difficult issue. But he told me that the issue of the school calendar would be an opportunity for some other designs, and that they would not look at this as a problem, but an opportunity. We also would see a shorter summer forcing us to compact some of our planning on summer maintenance projects. During the summer is when we normally do a lot of painting. This is when we do the sanding or the refinishing of gym floors. This is when we do a lot of our work that we simply don't want to interrupt classes for during the regular school year. But Mr. Mays told me this morning that they've already looked at reducing that length of time that they need during the summer to do some of the routine maintenance items. It can be done. So some of those challenges are not insurmountable, but these are some of the challenges that were identified in last month's board, or the last board meeting. That having been said, in your packets you have 2 different calendars. Now, they're not perfect calendars. They're still in draft form, and if you add the days, you're going to find that the tally is not quite right. I think it's 177 student days. That's what the math would tell you, but if you count the days, you'll find 181. So like I said, they're not perfect. We're moving that way in draft form, but one of them shows a 1-week spring break, one shows a 2-week spring break, and how that would play itself out. But you have a 1 week, like I said, at fall break, happens in early October, a 1 week at Thanksgiving break, the 2-week Christmas or holiday break, and then the 1 or 2 week spring break. Some of those breaks between the New Year's and spring break would simply be the breaks that we currently have, Martin Luther King Day, President's Day, but that's also the winter season when we generally have snow days. So that's why you don't plan for lengthy breaks during that period, that stretch. A lot of people say, well, those are the dog days of the school year. Yes, it is, but traditionally we see breaks take place that we haven't called for or anticipated. So take a look at that. We will probably be bringing you one of those calendars or something that looks very much like it. This is the time when you can ask us some questions or voice your disapproval or concern about any of it. Dixie, go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question about the spring break and just saying that we have a weather situation that keeps pushing everything back. I mean, we have had week-long blizzards, we've had, all kinds of stuff that happens. And how does that play with especially if it's 2 weeks, with the flexibility to get I-Step in?
Would you like to address that?
Well, I talked with someone from a school district where they had 2 weeks in the spring. And they decided to use the second week as snow makeup days. And that didn't work.
No.
People
didn't
didn't
come back.
remember,
Because
they
they
didn't
won't
come
come
back. So if we had a 2-week spring break, and, we might think about using that first week or just adding them at the end.
In some calendars, they provide almost a whole week at the end of the school year, and if you need those for makeup days, that's when you do it.
Yeah, I get that, but you would lose preparation time if it was pushed back because of weather. You would lose preparation time for I-Step.
You would. And there's no way, it would also create a huge imbalance of the trimesters as we now have them. You'd have a much shorter trimester in the second one, and then a much longer one at the end. So there would be an imbalance there. I don't have a great answer for you, though, on that.
I had a couple questions. The parent-teacher conferences would be a week, and do they get out half a day then, all week?
No, it's a little shorter day, but it's not a half day.
Okay.
It's a
It's a
Tuesday.
schedule
It's a
that
Tuesday
we've
schedule.
used for the last couple of years until this year.
For the full
We had
week?
early release on the full week, I'm pretty sure, didn't we?
Yeah, and the 3 days was not sufficient this year.
Okay, and then, when you talk about doing remediation during the 2 weeks, would that be, since that would be the whole reason, one of the biggest reasons for it, would that be mandatory?
No, it wouldn't be mandatory, but it certainly would be advised for students who are having academic difficulties. And some of the parents have already told us, who have had some casual conversation with us, that this would be a great option for their children. So, well, let me go first off answer. It would not be mandatory, but there would be some students who would have it highly recommended for them. Now, the challenge in that is to make sure that we have the teachers who are able to teach it,
Right.
Yeah.
the principals who can supervise, and that would be a cost issue.
Yeah.
Now, if we have better attendance, and we wouldn't have to rely on so many subs, that might provide the wherewithal to provide for the people to supervise.
I can see where the first year, there would be a lot of, probably, maybe not the attendance you would want till people get used to the idea of going to school during a break.
Yeah, for
Maybe.
the remediation.
I think you're probably right.
Jeff? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to ask the other thing. Will we have time to prepare things for the breaks concerning childcare options or places where kids can go so that we can show parents ahead of time before we start this kind of a schedule?
Well, that's why I had our conversation today with Bruce Daggy, was to let him know that this could be something coming down the pike. We would be alerting, well, let me say this. If you adopt that calendar, we could be serious about alerting our partners about this change that would happen. I think giving them 6 months lead time would be a good thing to do, and we would start by making sure that they all know through writing, and then have them come in and discuss with us the options that they might be able to provide. The other thing that we need to look into is that some of the schools that have gone to these calendars use their summer school dollars to pay for some of these projects that go on into the school year as a result of these longer breaks. So whether that remains an option for schools like us, I don't know, but we would have to research that.
Jeff?
I just had a couple of quick, I didn't get into the calendar real deep because I think this was just an introduction. I will say that in our discussion, our executive meeting discussion, or not executive discussion, or what do you call it? Yeah.
Agenda planning.
Thank you. You had mentioned possibly doing a 2-year calendar, and I just kind of, I don't want to lose sight of that. I think that's a good idea for planning purposes.
We are looking at a 15, 16 as well.
The other two points, one I've made before, if you look, and I guess I just look at it from the number of days on what I call the front half of the schedule, which is before Christmas, and then after. With a week in October, a week in November, then 2 weeks plus in December, and then you jump all the way until basically, you call it dog days, but I would sure think, I would almost like to see the fall break week move to like the end of February or something, because they're just such a long period of time from January 4th to spring break. That's a long period of time.
And last year, it was a long period of time because we didn't have any snow days. But generally, that is just not the way it is.
Well-
That's when we lose all of our days.
But, I mean, it's difficult to plan for snow days because you may have 5 of them in November and none in.
That's right.
So I think inherent in the schedule that we could pick up a day or two here for the snow. I would just like to see part of that pushed back, or take a week of that and push it back into the first quarter of the year. But, because then when I was looking at your parent-teacher conference, it's the same comment that I made last year, is your second. And I guess my feelings on this is if we talk about changing the calendar any, as far as start time, or semesters, trimesters, or those conversations from our meeting last week are going to start taking place. So if you have your parent-teacher conferences, we're on trimesters, but our parent-teacher conferences are still set up on semesters. If you take a look at your March parent-teacher conference, well, your second trimester ended a whole month before that. So I guess, to me, if we're going to stay trimesters in the elementary schools, in the middle schools, intermediate schools, then it seems like to me it would be better to align our parent-teacher conference weeks with how the grading period ends, because right now we're right in the middle of the 4th and the 5th as far as the grading period. So I guess aligning the parent-teacher conference with the kids and whatever schedule they're in, to me, is more important than where you place it, because right now it just seems to be stuck out there.
I don't think it was just stuck out there.
I'm sorry, I was counting days.
Well, can you talk about the rationale behind the placement of the parent-teacher conference times?
Well, the one at the beginning of the year, there was a desire not to have it so close to the beginning, so that teachers would have an opportunity to get to know the students. It's right in the middle of the first trimester.
Well, it's right after the second grading period ends, which kind of seems appropriate.
And the placement in Typically, our parent conferences have been just prior to spring break, a week or two before spring break. We've not changed that position really. And Jeff, even though we're on trimesters, there are 3 tries in the first, what we called semesters, and 3 in the second. And so we've just.
Not 3 tries.
Not
Three
weeks,
9-week
I'm sorry.
periods, yeah.
I'm sorry, weeks. I'm looking at weeks and days. The number of days in the first semester are the same before Christmas. I remember you mentioned something earlier about that. Before the winter holiday.
Well, I was talking about, you got the third grading period ends on December 19th, but within that compass, you've got October, November, and December with at least one full week or more off each of those months.
I was right, 6 grading periods.
And
It's
then,
in
right.
3 trimesters, yeah.
So, but that really doesn't, if I was gonna follow the same, well, parent-teacher conference to me seems like it would be more effective if it was moved up after the 4th grading period versus where we have it now.
We've gone lots of directions with that in the past. We've said, we don't want to focus the parent conference just on the grades. We want to talk about student progress, and if we have it too close to a grading period, we'll just focus on the grade. We've gone back and forth over the years I've been here.
But we'll factor your concern into our thinking.
Mhm.
Well, it just, my concern is if we put the parent, and maybe this is not, maybe we don't have the data to say it, but if we have parent-teacher conference the week before, we either have a 1-week spring break or a 2-week, then I'm just hoping that we don't lose participation because of spring break. So that was my only.
It's a good thought.
Mhm.
Thank you. Aaron?
I may be able to understand the rationale for this. At the same time, my heart is telling me very cautiously to ask the question of, just 2 weeks ago, we were having this discussion in small groups here. Now we're being presented with two different scenarios. Cautiously, I'm asking, what role are we going to have with articulating deliberately to the public about those parents, specifically those parents, in regards to this, and engaging them in the conversation to glean from them exactly what their thoughts or their input may be. At the same time, we've just been having these conversations in regards to hearing the student voice as well. And I want to make sure that while we're doing this or engaging in these conversations, that we do have deliberate conversation, hopefully, with the public who is going to be affected 100% by this, as well as the students before doing this. I'm concerned about, when the parent-teacher conferences may be, et cetera, but, I'm also concerned about the greater impact upon families out in the community to make this decision without maybe hearing from them.
We've, with this conversation, we're going very public with it. We've had this conversation before, and we've had it consistently. We've talked about it consistently, but not necessarily to the detail that you're seeing tonight. With this conversation, I'm quite sure that we'll have the media covering some of it, which will open some conversation. But if it's the board's desire to have a survey done, online survey or otherwise, we could also be very focused in the questions that we're asking about about this kind of calendar. I will say that we've discussed this calendar with the parent leadership group that comes around. This would not be the first time we've discussed it, but we have discussed this too. If you recall, one of the calendars we discussed a few years ago was a 4-day calendar. And the work day would actually look just like it does now, but every week we would have 1 day off, probably a Monday. So that would spread it out throughout the year, and it would truly be a year-round calendar with 1-day breaks where we could use intervention strategies as we need them, whether that's enrichment or remediation. At that point, we heard from the public and from our staff that certainly was not the direction they were wanting to go at that time. So we remained with the traditional calendar. What's driving this conversation is that by talking to some of the school districts that have gone to this calendar, some good things have happened that we weren't anticipating, which could be a reason to pursue it now.
Following your last point, how many other school districts in our county follow this? And what about the other, have we had conversations with the other school entities, Seton and Friends and all of those schools? Not that we have to lead that conversation, but what about the other schools in the county? Nettle Creek did
I
this.
know that Nettle Creek is
Nettle
doing it.
Creek Nettle Creek. I'm thinking of Hagerstown,
Nettle
okay.
Creek, mhm.
They went with Newcastle's calendar because they have services from Newcastle.
Joint
and
co-op.
They're
Sure.
part of the co-op there. Centerville, I believe, went with Connorsville because of their,
But they both have these balanced calendars, don't they? Similar,
they have,
something.
they have a calendar that's revised, and basically they have the week in the fall. And I'm not sure about the number of weeks at spring break.
Modified. So Northeastern and would be the.
Northeastern is on our calendar because we
We
have
share.
students.
So if we go to this calendar, does that imply?
We would have to work with some of our partner schools.
So how might this affect the transientness of our population? If, is it having any effect now?
We didn't look, the teachers that I met with on the calendar committee, we didn't look at that at all. As far as the students moving between schools, that subject didn't come up.
I'm not sure how you would anticipate that. With a 2-week break, I'm not so sure that you would see much more than we have right now, but that's just a guess.
I think you're more talking about those that move in and out of our district.
Oh, I couldn't answer that one.
Well, I mean, I think that's something that we should consider. I don't know what our movement rate is right now, but, I mean, that could be a number of days.
That a student would miss school, that's a good point.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure how we would anticipate that either.
Or how
Well,
you
I'm
do
not sure that we can anticipate it other than knowing what we already know, about our students moving in and out. I think we would probably have to look at, we wouldn't be able to look and predict other than looking at our trends from past.
I attended calendar discussions, a number of National School Board Association, and one that struck me the most was I think it was Kearney, Nebraska. But it wasn't just childcare. They really had their partners doing very innovative, creative things. So, for example, COPE might have fewer sessions in the summer, but they would use these breaks for their sessions. And so if we go to this calendar, we need to make sure that we don't look at just a few usual suspects who provide childcare, but anybody and everybody who does innovative, creative programming for kids would need to be involved in that, because I think they would appreciate spreading out their programs over the year and not so intense in the summer. I mean, it may be an advantage to them.
Could
So they're
be.
thinking about what they're doing.
Well, and I guess I would hope that we would maybe use the term enrichment more so than remediation. I mean, that could be damaging. I mean, to students who, are going to school extra days. And I think we could do as much with enrichment as we could with, probably more than with remediation.
I'm assuming that you're not talking about the different levels of school being on different calendars. The high school, the intermediate, they will all be the same calendar.
We are.
Have you looked at our students that go to Earlham or Ivy Tech, how that would, does moving it earlier and later, does that?
No,
It's already
that,
off.
that would not be, right now, we're not on the same schedule or calendar either. And our students make that work. So that, it would still be a challenge, but I don't know that it would be any less of a challenge or more of a challenge than we currently face.
So let me ask you this, so what do you see as the next steps? What's the?
Well, the next step would be to communicate with the public, and maybe get some feedback from them on this and bring that along with the recommendation. We need to make a recommendation and get something out there. If you're going to stay with the traditional calendar, we need to know that. We need to know if we're going to make a change. A lot of people are not willing to put a lot of resources into planning unless there's an official change. And so at the next board meeting, the December board meeting, I will be making a recommendation. And it will be based upon some feedback that we've heard on this, from this discussion.
Okay, and so you're going to be, though, doing a survey or something as far as our parents are?
Would you like to have a survey done?
Well, like,
Would that be important?
How are you planning on addressing the public, or asking the public's opinion? How would you go
What
about
we've done before, we've worked through the PTOs. So we've been rather focused on people who are face-to-face and work with us in that way. We've also done some paper messages sent home with the students, but an online survey would not be very difficult to work.
Given the time frame?
Sure, it wouldn't be hard at all.
Suzanne?
I have a question regarding whether to me, the conversation regarding schedule and calendar are hard to separate.
Yeah, I would agree.
And we have had some conversations regarding whether we switch the start times of the intermediate and the elementary. We have had some conversations about trimesters versus semesters. And I'm not sure how I noticed that trimesters stays in at least this so far, but.
That's just because that's what we have.
I know, but I guess my question is, if we're going to engage the public, would it make sense to make all of those conversations at one time, or? I know we have a tendency to change a lot at one time, but they're so blended that.
Yeah.
Well, there's no reason why when we ask the question, we can't also talk about trimester and semester. That's the basic question. The schedule that you're talking about, which would be flipping the day of high school and elementary, that really can be done regardless of the semester or trimester arrangement, or calendar for that matter. And that does need to have some conversation.
I guess I just think they're all sort of so connected that I just want to make sure we didn't have them in vacuums.
The challenge for me with that, I mean, I understand the start time and stop time. That, I think, is a legitimate place. But I'm not sure that the answer to Mrs. Bailey's question and the other students' questions we heard is solely in whether it's trimesters
agree
or
with
semesters.
that,
There have to be other ways
I
to
agree.
deal with that question that isn't just, I mean, there may be other ways, I should say, to deal with that question that doesn't have to do with
Just
whether we
making it
flip
either
to
or.
go right back to semesters or trimesters. I think there are other things we have to look at to deal with the high school schedule.
Well, and the high school, we should not be leaving the high school faculty out of this conversation, because
Absolutely.
I think that there could be some innovative designs within
Absolutely.
the current calendar and
think so.
schedule arrangement that would provide some options that Mrs. Bailey hinted at tonight.
Right. And that some of the students were hinting at.
Yeah. Well, given the time frame, would it behoove us to maybe go with a more traditional calendar for this upcoming year, which would be 2014-15? knowing that we are going to study all of the things that, I mean, if they're all interrelated, it seems as though that we need some time to make contact and communication with all the groups necessary. You know,
We said that
sometimes-
last year too, and
That's true.
I have no problem with maintaining the status quo because that's just less work for us to.
Well, but I'm not
But-
suggesting maintaining the status quo forever. I'm just, as I listen here and think about the number of things that have been brought up, and for you to have a recommendation by our next board meeting, that seems just too rushed to me. And I'm not at all advocating status quo, but I am advocating communication. So,
And I appreciate everything, Dr. Borf, that you have done and that, you know, the studies that have gone on and what the cabinet has done in regards to bringing this information to us. I'm sitting here right now, again, fresh, listening to the voices of students a couple weeks ago and their concerns of how we make decisions, and parents who get concerned how we make decisions. All of a sudden, they read in the newspaper or a letter comes home, and all of a sudden, there's a change in their student's life that impacts the family. And I'm in favor of going to one of these calendars wholeheartedly. However, I'm being very cautious because I want to make sure that if and when we do move to that we've got the support of the public who has prepared themselves to make decisions that, you know, 6 months, 7 months from now, you know, I'm going to have to make these decisions based upon, you know, childcare or something else because we're going to, you know, go to a different school calendar. Instead of, you know, suddenly putting that on them, because the greater concern that I have is doing this in a manner that impacts a family negatively, and they say, well, I can't do this, so we're going to move our kids and we're going to go elsewhere. I don't want to see our ADM numbers go down any further, and if this has a negative impact on that, I want to do whatever we can to protect our ADM numbers,
much
to
is
keep them
enough
as they
time?
are.
Well, let me ask the board right now.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to take a motion to maintain the traditional calendar for one more year while we work out options? Do it, make that, and we'll be bringing you a very different calendar in 2 weeks.
well, I think it depends on exactly what is going to be entailed in our, if we go to a different calendar. Are we going to be talking about, do we do trimester, do we do semester, do we do, you know, whatever? Is it going to be switching times? I mean, how much is going to be entailed in this process? I think the things that were discussed here and added on, that makes it a lot different than just looking at the calendar.
Yeah, we were not planning to bring any kind of a recommendation on the school calendar concerning a trimester. I mean, if you recall, that was almost a year-long conversation the last time we did it. We have not begun that conversation. And we also have not talked about flipping the day yet. Now, we could be doing that as well, but that was not going to be the calendar recommendation. That wasn't a part of the calendar recommendation. But before we start down that road, I mean, if you feel that we need more time to focus on this conversation and bring the two other pieces into it, we can certainly do that. But let's make that decision. We'll start planning for that and move forward in that fashion, if you would like to go that
Is
direction.
there a reason why you wouldn't want to delay?
Wouldn't want to delay?
Delay making these kinds of changes? Like, is there a sense of urgency to go here to this?
We are already having phone calls. People want to know when next year's fall break, spring break, when are
Sure.
they gonna, I mean, people
Sure.
call us beginning the end of August, 1st of September
Sure.
for the next year calendar.
People plan vacations over a year. in
Right, I
advance.
know
But-
they do.
And you said you spoke with Mr. Daggy. Have we had those groups in here at all? And how much is enough time to have these conversations with program providers? I mean, we're talking about, it's almost December. This wouldn't start till August, but
Typically, it
still.
is this time of year
this is when people start.
that we would
Getting
like to
calls.
have it finished. Sometimes it's been later, and that's just because of all the other things that we have going on in the school district, but people like to know.
This is the time of year we would normally be doing calendar, and we were trying to seize the opportunity to look at some alternatives. But is there anything else driving this, urgency-wise,
No, just
other than working towards,
working towards
more
a
beneficial
calendar that would increase attendance.
Right,
That was one of the
Right.
driving forces.
gotcha.
But truly, I mean, as an administration, we're here all around, year round.
Well, I
So
would say, let's just, I'll make the motion that we,
Wait, before
sure.
before you make the motion, I don't know what your motion's going to be,
I'm gonna stop.
but,
I was just gonna end the conversation.
well, that's what I'm afraid of. I don't mind a motion being made, but I guess I would like for us to see if we can reach some kind of consensus, because I don't sense what the board's really feeling, so.
I think, frankly, the public hears calendar and they think absolutely everything. And so if we change the calendar days, and then, we change the
The next year
the
we change.
semesters, and then we change all those, they'll say to you, why do you keep changing your mind? I guess I try to look at this from the public's point of view. They probably think we can't make up our mind if we keep doing all those little bits and pieces. It makes sense to do it all at one time, I guess.
Then we
for me
need to
right now.
maybe make a list of what we would like to be taken into account. Like you said, the communication before the recommendation next year.
Well, and it sounds like we need to have everything rolled into one. We need to have a conversation on the schedule, we need to have a conversation on the daily schedule,
Public sees
the semester, trimester, and the calendar. That's a huge conversation. And we have not had that kind of conversation.
But the public does see it all as one. We may not, but don't they see it all as one?
That's what
saying. No,
No.
not
Don't think the
necessarily.
public sees it
Because
all
we
as
have already had the public ask us about
When are those breaks?
why are the elementary students out so early in the morning? Couldn't care less about the length of the calendar. They're concerned about,
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean, when we take,
But they're separate, is what he's
schedules,
saying.
yeah.
those
There-
are
It
separate.
depends about the issue of the day. If they are driving, when you drive out in the early morning, you ask that question. When you're ready to plan your vacation, you ask the calendar question.
Right.
So,
But I can
I
clearly,
see what you're saying.
I could clearly see how trimester semesters would impact the schedule.
That's true.
Dixie?
I don't have a problem with this calendar, the proposed calendar. I'm a little leery about the 2 weeks at spring break, just because I see the 1 week maybe, but 2 weeks I think would be problematic for parents, for organization of activities for that length of time. The rest of it is just stretching other stuff a little bit further, which is okay, I think. That's where I'm
What
at.
if you took this information under advisement and then came back with your recommendation, as you previously said? Just, you heard us talk about all these things, you were gonna do it anyway, and maybe
I'm prepared to do that.
decide it's,
Well, and could you hold it off until our first meeting in January and get some communication going with our parents and just see how they react and
partners.
respond? And then that should lead you into what direction you feel would be appropriate. Does that make sense? I mean,
If that's what you, if you would like a recommendation in January as opposed to December,
would that be,
fine.
would that be a horrible thing if we, I don't know, what do you guys think? That's just,
I don't want to just put this off. I mean, as Dixie said, it's workable, but we want to make sure that all these other things get taken care of too in the meantime before it takes effect. So I don't know how you would want to word that motion.
we will begin as early as tomorrow, trying to get feedback from the community on this kind of calendar and what that would suggest. A separate conversation will go on to the service providers that work with us as partners. But like I said, the service providers may not devote many resources to this question until we make a decision. So
Makes sense.
it's what we've heard.
well, what's the will of the board? You know,
I say continue on as you were, based on what we've said. We've given you a lot to go on, I know, but I don't want to halt what you were thinking.
right.
Well, and I don't know how many conversations you can have over the holidays. That becomes difficult too, so it
That
might,
was one of my thoughts too. Dixie.
yeah, it might be to just kind of rethink based on our conversation and bring a recommendation, I guess.
I'm fine with that.
It's clear as mud.
School board
We will be bringing a recommendation at the next meeting.
at the next meeting?
Include in that recommendation that we're going to look at start times and, not that they'll be there.
The recommendation could end up being a traditional, an
It could be.
unchanged calendar.
Could be.
With progress toward,
Yeah.
I can see all that, so.
Well, with all that you've heard us say, and I mean, if you're going to present us with a recommendation, the next board meeting, I strongly urge, you don't wait till tomorrow. You get working on it tonight.
I think Rachel's doing that for us.
You know what, do
Vicky?
they still do PI Live? You could go up.
No.
They don't
No,
do PI
no,
Live
it's
at all?
done.
Retiring with Dale, oh,
Yeah, it's already done, isn't it?
yeah.
Okay, thank you for your input.
Remember, we used to get all kinds of feedback when we.
Now, we also had a second part of our work session last time, and I wanted to go over that. That was a whole segment on special purpose schools / enrollment, / some other things too. We started those conversations by talking about different types of special purpose schools. We defined it by example. One of them we have, which is the entrepreneurial school at Star. We could also have an integrated arts. Integrated arts would be teaching the basics through the arts. It sounds simple, it's anything but, takes a lot of training, but it's a very exciting program. International Baccalaureate takes 3 years to prepare, but it focuses on international studies. It's international vetting of projects. We don't have anything like that in the Richmond Community Schools, but that is an example of a special purpose school. A language immersion program is something we've talked about. That's a situation where students are actually immersed in a second language part of the day. Another part of the day they're taught in English, and the other half of the student body would be immersed in that second language. That's at least an example. Montessori has to do with early education. Montessori would not be appropriate for intermediate or, well, I suppose maybe a theory of that could be done. It's more student-led learning. Then you have the STEMs, which would be science, technology, engineering, and math. A variation of that is to add another M and you get media. Another variation of that is to put art in there. And another variation of that would be, I can't
Reading.
remember. Reading. Okay, focus on reading. Then, of course, there's new tech.
Two M's.
New Tech, we've talked about before. New Tech is part of the CEL-led efforts across the state. There's also early college, and I didn't even put that on there because we're dabbling in that and moving forward. Those are examples. Now, why do we even look at that? Well, as we talked last time, one of the reasons that we would have special purpose schools in a district the size of Richmond is that it does help to balance enrollment. It defines choice, it provides choice, and particularly when you have a district that would be divided in half with sister schools in both halves, providing those special purpose programs. For example, if you have an international baccalaureate on the east side and one on the west side, integrated arts on the east side, one on the west side, you tend to have a balancing of your enrollment through choice as opposed to redistricting. Another purpose would be exploratory opportunities. It does provide some options for students who are interested in learning or capable of learning in a particular way that would not be as well serviced through a traditional comprehensive program. Defining our pathways, we've talked about the pre-K 4, 5, 8, 9, 12, and how those are pathways or can provide pathways to various kinds of more unique, independent learning opportunities. But that has to be begun for articulation in pre-K. If you're going to work with an integrated arts, for example, you want to make sure that that pathway finds itself through the intermediate on to the high school. Those are some of the needs. More instruction time in ways that students best learn. Decreasing the mobility among schools could be enhanced by having students choose particular schools with the idea that they're staying there. This should be a challenge, addressing all ages. Addressing all ages is a challenge because, like I said, in a special purpose program at the elementary, your thought is that it's all going to continue, and sometimes that doesn't happen. Teaching the curriculum would be teaching those Indiana standards, national standards maybe, through these different approaches would have to be a part of the special purpose schools. And the exploratory opportunities would be a restatement of the exploratory opportunities in number 2. There are challenges, though, that we talked about, and we spent a lot of time talking about the challenges. In both groups, both sessions, we talked about avoiding the haves and the have-nots. What makes the difference, or what constitutes the difference between haves and have-nots is not necessarily a monetary issue or a socioeconomic. It comes down to information in some cases. If a child has parents who are informed, then those children have a leg up, an advantage, on their classmates whose parents do not have information or who are not informed to make those choices. You want, in this second point, high quality in all choices. But if you have children whose parents are not informed, you may have ideally, very appropriately, options that are missed because those children are not being provided the direction to choose, or their parents aren't choosing what would be most appropriate for those children. Ultimately, the school stands to benefit from good choices. At K4, the question was, whose choice is it anyway? It's going to be a parent's choice as opposed to a child's choice at that early stage, and how can you be sure that the parents are adequately informed? Another challenge is designing with staff input. You can create a decision at this level and say that next year we're going to operate an integrated arts program at such and such a school. Unless you have the staff trained and unless you've had them help design the program, chances are you're not going to have the high quality offering that you're hoping to see. Integrating the concept is another challenge that we discussed last time. Integrating the concept means you don't just teach music in an integrated arts program. You use music to teach reading. You use music to teach writing and math and science. That takes training again. Some of these options take financing. In an integrated arts program that we saw at Kokomo, they had invested in keyboards, a whole lab of keyboards, a whole lab of violins. They have redone their gymnasium to make it an informances stage area. There's been a lot of input, but there's also been a lot of financing. Appropriate grade levels, which goes back to at K4, whose choice is it? One of the questions was, is it really appropriate to even have choice programs at the elementary? We also know that in the case of language immersion, that's the best place to have choice programs. Children learn very rapidly in immersion programs the younger they are. Transportation, I think it can be worked out, but it is an issue. It's a challenge. We talked about different transportation designs and having stations or transfer stations for children if you went with a total choice option across the community. And then transitions would be an issue. Transitioning to this would be an issue for the students. Transitioning from K4 to a 5-8 is also an issue. These were significant enough that my first response was to say, we definitely don't want to move fast into this realm. We need to take it easy and perhaps slow our planning down. We're already talking about some significant changes coming to us through technology and moving some of that forward. My thought was maybe we should focus on technology. But in talking to some board members and administrators, it was felt maybe we need to spend a little time talking about that too. Maybe this is not the time to back away. Maybe it's the time to engage in more conversation and talk about what this could look like. So there we are. Where would you like to go
We are
from
not
here?
going to make a decision tonight.
Put it off to next year.
I'm not
Put it off
making
to
a
January.
recommendation at the next board meeting on this one either. But I am interested in hearing from the board, because my first comment to our cabinet the next morning was, I'm disengaging from this one for right now. I think we need to focus on technology. And I had a lot of pushback from the cabinet when I met with in our planning session for the agenda. The 3 board members I talked to, it was much the same. Let's, wait a minute, hold on. So I'm very open to your thoughts on this.
Kelly?
I think that we just reconfigured our grades, and we have had so many changes to deal with, not just us, but I mean, the parents have had so many, and the students have had so many changes. To change again would, I think we need some stability a little bit, for a little while.
And we heard some of those comments last time.
Dixie?
Well, I think too that the conversations, if they have started and moving in that direction, the ownership for something like this is critical. And it's really what makes it successful or not successful. So I would say, let the conversations continue and let it grow and see what happens.
I wanted to go back just a second. Except for technology, I mean, that's something we have to have conversations about, because it's gonna happen, you know, whether we plan for it or not, it's gonna be there, so it's better to plan for it.
Pat?
As I listened the other evening, two or three things struck me. One was, I want us to define our pathways, because if we defined pathways in a fairly tangible way, we would have pre-K 4 discovering, and I could see uniformly across the system, discovery as, or, and not the old Discovery School, but how about just discover, as a focal point, and then explore for, you know, the intermediate and focus as we use that, but actually use those as the special purpose for each of those particular things. But I went back to a session I heard at the Indiana School Board Association, the Penn, what is it, up north, Penn,
Harris Madison.
Penn, Harrison, Madison, where their board said, you know, we don't need to go necessarily to special purpose. We want the special purpose within the school. We tell schools that we want, what's the reason for doing that? It's to engage students. Make what we are already doing more engaging, more 21st century skills, and then we don't have to totally change everything, but people would know that we are going to focus on those as our special purpose. Because I heard the elementary teachers saying loud and clear in both, in that discussion, K4 needs to try as many different things, and you don't want to focus them too soon. So I came out of the conversation less likely to support special purpose schools, especially for PK4. It was my thought that the intermediate schools is where we really need the focus to begin to engage students in some very different ways as they explore. So
Suzanne?
that didn't say a whole lot.
I actually can agree with that completely, except for one issue that we have, which is the enrollment balancing. Because we've right-sized ourselves numerically, we have a better handle on the number of seats that we need for the number of kids we have. The issue, as it always has been, is that are they in the right places? And so, and that changes clearly because our 5410 was created because of Westview. And now Westview is where our spaces are. So I think we need to re-look at that also. And I do think that the special purpose or that kind of idea has the opportunity to do some of that enrollment balancing. So I actually agree with everything you said, but I'm a little worried about not proceeding because I think that has the potential to help us with that enrollment balance.
But there have to be other ways to deal with the enrollment balance.
I don't disagree. I just, plus I think the idea of presenting the basics in different ways is wonderful. I love the idea of it, but I found myself conflicted even on our small group meeting because I do also tend to agree that lots of opportunities in every school would be great.
Well, and we also, we have an example of a choice school that, and whether people send their students there because of the particular purpose that it serves, the fact is that they do send their children there.
It's a choice, and they're taking it.
And it's filled, and really it's over capacity. And so that, just that example, I think tells us that it is something that obviously parents do look at as a positive, and you know, like I said, why they're sending their child there or their children there, we don't know for sure, but I'm sure there are multiple reasons. And like Suzanne said, the enrollment balance. We have to work on our enrollment balance.
Because I don't think our policies, I think it may have worked for us when we were the other size. I'm not sure it's working for us now, where we're now right-sized, where we are at the right capacity. I'm not sure it's working the same way now.
Dixie?
Well, I wanted to go back to what Pat said, that the pathways discussions, because those really will become, or should become, the organizational framework for curriculum and what have you for what we learn in each grade or segment of grade levels. And you can, and then the individual schools, through their discussions, that can be taken care of in many different ways. But that's what I'm talking about, the discussions, it has to come from them. There has to be buy-in, there has to be ownership, there has to be enthusiasm, there has to be people who really want to do these kinds of things, and if it's special purpose schools. But it has to be done under the umbrella of the pathways conversations that we've had.
Wasn't the key at that integrated art school, it was integrated. Every class we saw was working on math and music and all of those. Unlike, I know when we were listening to Stephanie, what she said about ESA was they have to kind of fit that in, and it hasn't truly been an integrated way of teaching all of the core subjects that we need to teach. And so, is the question to say, okay, we're going to do them with a special purpose, or is the question, how are we going to make all the stuff we have to do for every kid more engaging so that we have kids clamoring to come to school and be successful and all of those things. So I'm not sure where I come down on this, because I was really, just really appreciated what I was trying to think the word I really wanted to use, really appreciated what they were doing in Kokomo. But I wanted that for every kid. I guess that's the challenge for me.
Anybody else? Well, there you have
I
it.
appreciate the input.
Clear as mud again.
With the recommendations that we'll be bringing shortly on some of our strategies for technology, I really believe that's where my focus is going to be. And I don't think I'll be putting too many resources towards a special purpose school at this time. But I really like the idea of a special purpose school too. Maybe a number of them. So you may not hear about it for a few weeks or months, but it will be coming back.
Well, maybe our staffs can be beginning to think and create and discuss and dream and, all of those things to
Because
think
remember,
about.
that's where the first one came from, was from within the staff of that school.
How can we encourage the staff to dream and
question.
think and question?
That's
Good question.
what Dr. Borf needs to.
We'll work on that.
Okay.
And then I guess have you done research on other ways, the balancing of enrollment? Have you looked at other?
Well, that's a policy discussion, and we'll be bringing that back.
Yeah, I know. Policy. Well, I know, but policy, as we've discovered, works for a while, and then it doesn't work, so.
Well, that's why we need to bring it back to the board, though. We need, at the central office level, we need to review that policy, knowing some of the questions that you're looking at. Bring it back for more conversation, and it probably won't stay right there. It needs to probably go back then to have some conversation in other circles. That policy, if you recall, didn't just develop on its own.
Yes.
That was the result of a problem and working together
Absolutely.
to try to solve that. So that's where it's going to stay, I think.
Okay.
The next report answers a question that some of you have had individually. I don't know. Oh, go ahead. You can pull it up. One of the questions that you've had is, how are our board goals making their way into the classroom? Does your strategic plan have a life to it, and what kind of difference is it making? We're going to be talking about that this evening. Dr. Parker works with our strategic plan and works with the data and has collected information. We've been reviewing those through our CPAS conversations with principals, And so I turn it over to her.
All right, thank you, Dr. Borf. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the data pages that I sent you. All of the data that we're collecting is in response to the board goals. And so one thing we know, our first goal is to have 90% of our students reading on grade level. And so we had to have a metric to measure that. And so for grades 5 through 12 last year, we used the Scholastic Reading Inventory. For grades K to 2, we used DIBELS. For grades 3 and 4, we used just sort of a combination of the things that classroom teachers had because we didn't have a standardized measure. And so one of the things that coaches and principals talked about was how can we have a measure that is going to measure reading for us? And so we looked at a lot of different things and decided to bring in a Renaissance product called Star Reading. And so we implemented that this year. We're doing 3 benchmarks a year so that we can give you updates on where we are with our reading. So the original plan was to implement that K to 6. And so that's where we started the year. Well, once the 7th and 8th grade teachers began to see the reports and the information that teachers were harvesting from STAR, the 7th and 8th grade came to us and said, may we please have this instead of SRI? We want this data on our students. And so we purchased some additional seats. And so we're using the STAR reading for grades K to 8 to measure reading. And we continue to use Scholastic Reading Inventory for 9 to 12. And then another goal that we have is that 90% of our students will be achieving grade level standards. And so we measure that through acuity. And the decision was made last year, again, based on input from teachers and coaches and principals to move from the predictive to the diagnostic track of acuity. And that involves pre-test and post-test. And it's very standards-based education, very standards-based instruction, very standards-based response to the instruction. But what we have is sort of a perfect storm of things happening. We added the STAR Reading and STAR Math, and that gave us a progress monitoring tool for our RTI. And so the decision was made to progress monitor students once a month or every 2 weeks using that. So that added some additional assessment and took up some lab time because that's an online assessment. And then we have students in grades K to 2 have never done online assessment, having to learn how to do online assessment and the pre-test, post-test model. And so that decision to do pre-test, post-test was based on the experience at Fairview, who had done the diagnostic pre-test, post-test, and was using that to guide their instructional groups. And so I know we're doing a lot of assessment. We're monitoring that. We're going to respond to that. We're going to talk to coaches. We're going to talk to principals. We're going to talk to teachers to see where we can make some changes to kind of alleviate some of that. But what I can tell you from our conversations in CPAS is the data that's being collected is driving instruction on a daily basis. The principals and the coaches brought in the planning templates that they're using for their intervention groups with students. That data that we are collecting is being used to drive instruction. So what I've got for you tonight is just an example of how schools are reporting on their CPAS data. I have a notebook that has a hard copy of it, which we'll keep here that you can come in and look at if you want. We'll also send these to you on your or in PDF format so that you can open on your computer. We're trying to be a little bit environmentally conscious and not make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copies, but I do have a hard copy here if you need it. So what we did was we took the strategic plan that we created based on the board focus areas and the board targets. You told us these are the things that you need to be working on. And at the district level, we created the strategies and said these are the things that we are going to do to make sure that we meet these. And you'll be getting the district strategic plan response next week. We have one more CPAS meeting on Monday with a high school. Once we get that, we'll be able to complete the district one. But this is what the template would look like. And so what you'll see is your targets that you've set, and then each school has identified some strategies. All schools are going to be implementing those district strategies that we said at the district level. This is their response to what they're doing individually at their school that is unique to their school. So I'm not going to read through this. I just wanted to show you sort of an example of what it's going to look like. Okay. kind of scroll down. All the schools responded with things that they're doing specific to their school. So some schools are doing their LEAP groups a little differently. Some are using their Title I dollars a little differently to provide more supports for students. Some schools have been able to leverage some of their Title I funds to get some iPads available for student use. You'll see that reflected in the response here. Professional development, all the schools are monitoring their feedback that they're getting from teachers on the professional development that they're implementing and making mid-flight correction where needed to ensure that we have sort of a differentiated professional development. One of the areas that is new this year, and I think we're all a little uncertain and everyone's moving forward, is having those conversations with the teachers and the students about joy of learning and collecting that data. Some schools are a little further along than that, but you'll see their response to that and their progress on that in these plans. As far as the communication and parent involvement, you're going to see lots of schools reporting the different things that they do. Obviously, the celebrations and rituals reports, you will be, I think, blown away by the number of opportunities that our schools have for students to be celebrated and recognized, and the things that are unique to their schools. For communication and getting parents involved, the conversations that we've had with the principals and the coaches, it's very clear to us that our teachers routinely go the extra mile to get parents involved. We've had reports of teachers going and to the homes and having parent-teacher conferences on the porch because the parent cannot come to school. We've had reports of principals walking to pick up parents and bring them to school, or driving to pick up parents and bring them to school. So this just has an awful lot of rich anecdotal information in it to support what they're doing to ensure that they reach their goals. So you will have one of these for each of our 6 elementary schools. You'll have one for each of our intermediate schools, one for the high school, and for the district as a whole. And I will just send those to you, and you can review them, and if you have questions, let me know. Are there any questions tonight?
Questions?
On the acuity forms, how, I'm assuming that you use some of this even to look back for curricular decisions. When I looked at the acuity math form in first grade, my big question was, so what did we do in kindergarten that didn't prepare kids for that? And will we be making curricular decisions based even on the first?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, the reading data, the kindergarten students take a different test because the STAR reading, in order to enter that, you have to be able to read 100 words. And so the kindergarten students took what's called the STAR Early Literacy Assessment, which is really more foundational reading skills. And so their scores were a little higher, and we expected that. The other thing, as far as all the data this first time through, we feel that much of it was just kids learning how to do the assessment. So teachers are taking that data and they're combining with what they see on a daily basis in the classroom to make decisions about kids. We would never say, this is the be-all, end-all. This is a dipstick, we do it. So that first time through, we knew that was going to happen. The other thing that we found was that we had aligned our maps with the DOE curriculum maps. And our teachers came to us and said, you know, for instance, at 3rd grade, we don't think that the sequence that the DOE is teaching us in makes sense. Can we move things around? And so we brought a group of teachers in. They realigned the maps, which said, now we need to realign our assessments. And so what we're striving for is to have perfect alignment with our instruction and our assessments. So we started out using the assessments that were created by the DOE. We used those the first time through. We're bringing in groups of teachers to write tests that are more perfectly aligned with our instruction. First grade was an area of concern because the assessments that came from Acuity were too difficult. The reading passages were so difficult that all we were finding was kids couldn't read the passages, so we had no way of knowing if they could do main idea, recall detail, any of the things that we wanted to know. So we had a group of first grade teachers in who have actually authored items, written some passages and questions so that we can better measure that. So we're sort of, as I said, we're making mid-flight corrections.
Anyone else?
I just would like to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just, this is exactly what we asked for, so, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dixie, did you want to say?
I just wanted to ask, at some point in time, we talk a lot about testing, and I know, it's helping us know where kids are and guiding instruction, but at some point, I know you can't do it tonight, but how many tests per year do kids in elementary, intermediate, and high school actually take during the year? Even if they're like in special ed, RTI, all that kind of stuff, how many tests do they take?
You're talking about standardized tests, not like a unit or not something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably a piece of what we're up against, because we had a weekly test and unit test in the Pearson materials that teachers were using, and we had said, because we're going to be doing acuity, especially K-2, where it's every 6 weeks, and 3 to 8, where it's every 9 weeks, that we would no longer require them to do those. Teachers, they get what, data that they like from those. And so we have some teachers who are continuing to do those weekly tests and those unit tests. We have teachers who are continuing to do spelling tests. And so there's testing that is outside our direction. They're doing it because that's what they want to do. I can tell you that K-2, there are 6 pre-tests and 6 post-tests. And 3 to 8, there are 4 pre-tests and 4 post-tests in acuity. The benchmark for reading is 3 times a year. Right now, if you're in Tier 2 for RTI, you're redoing that STAR reading assessment or that STAR math assessment once a month. If you're Tier 2 or Tier 3 or in special ed, you're doing that every 2 weeks.
I guess one of the questions I had was when I looked at the STAR reading, and it's at benchmark or on watch or intervention or urgent intervention. And I saw many students that were at that intervention or urgent intervention category, and I began, looking across and thinking, okay, so how can our staff possibly meet all of these needs? And it seems as though many times it doesn't make any difference whether you have 10 kids at intervention or urgent intervention compared to, I noticed some schools had as many as 60 kids, but they have similar resources. And so how are we dealing with that?
Well, those are conversations that we've had with principals and coaches because, like you, we see those numbers and we're a little alarmed. Obviously, every school does have an interventionist. Some have 2 because of Title I. But one of the things that has been helpful is that we have built in that 30 minutes of leap time for reading and 30 minutes of leap time for math into our schedules for all students. And so what a lot of the schools are discovering is that they can be more focused and intentional with their interventions if they group all the kids within a grade level and sort the students that way, so that a teacher may not just do intervention with her students. Let's say the 3rd grade as a whole needs intervention, and so they can create more homogeneous groups, and teachers will work with students who are not necessarily their students. And so they're able to be a little bit more focused when they group that way. And so a lot of schools have already moved in that direction. Many are moving in that direction.
Another question that I had when I looked at the data, and I specifically picked out 4th grade.
Okay.
Because that would have been our kids from 3rd grade, and that scored we were like at 92% on iRead. Well, when I looked at both the acuity and the STAR, they weren't anyways close to that 92%. And as a matter of fact, they were at more like 50 and 60%. And so then I get concerned whether the assessments that we're doing are going along with, like iRead and with iStep, because it seemed as though the acuity and the STAR were pretty close.
Well, what I can tell you about iRead 3, and I hate to say this, but it's the bottom floor of proficiency. So we would expect that our measurements to run a little lower than that. And what we need to do is we need to go through this process for a year, and then we, for instance, need to look at our third graders this year and how they've scored, and then look at how they do on iRead 3 so that we can kind of get an indicator of what kind of inflation we're going to see there. Our acuity scores last year, well, our acuity scores for as long as I've done this have always under-predicted how we do on iStep. We've always done better on iStep than our acuity scores would suggest, and that's a good thing. We don't want to over-predict. Certainly don't want to over-predict. And so once we've gone through the cycle and we have those state mandated tests and we have those results, then we can begin to see, is there some sort of a pattern, and make sure that we know what that pattern's going to be.
Well, I was thinking that if indeed these assessments are helping to guide instruction, are they guiding the way that they need to guide? You know, because, it just appears that there's a lot of need there. And, I guess I was just concerned, because I'm thinking, okay, so are our kids leaving third grade reading as we think they are, as shown on our iRead tests? Or is that not a good measure?
Well, I think that we need to understand what iRead 3 is. 92% of our students left third grade meeting minimum proficiency requirements for that test. Do we have higher hopes for our students? Absolutely. We want them to read more than the state says they need to read. So, this data is helping to guide us to do that.
That's interesting.
Okay, then, one more thing that I wanted to ask. Do you have the reading assessment from the high school? Do you have that data?
That data is
you will-
included. You should have a 9 to 12 page.
Oh, I
The
guess
data. Did you not get that?
no.
I don't think so.
The overall data that you got for reading includes the high school reading data as well, but I do have I don't know, it just didn't get sent, but I'll be sure to send it.
No,
It
did
only
anybody
went
else?
K
No.
through 4.
Yeah.
Okay, so there should have been a K through 4, a 5 through 8, and a 9 through 12 page, so. I'll
We
see
need
where
5
those-
through 8 and 9 through 12.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. We are now ready for action items.
We have our donations that we are bringing to you tonight for approval, one which you have already approved, but I turn to Mr. Coddington to present those.
Thank you. Tonight, we ask the board to approve the following donations from Paul and Carla Bergfelder to Community Partnership and Engagement, from the Chinese Education Connection to the Richmond Community Schools, for the International Student Fund, from Meyer to Hibbard for Life Skills Scouting Program, again from Paul and Carla Bergfelder, the RHS Parent Center, a donation for the R shelves in the Parent Center. From Richmond Independent Insurance Agents Association, along with the Wayne County Insurance Services, RHS Athletics, a donation to the Athletic Department. From Rod Weiss, a donation to RHS Athletics to the Boys Basketball Program. From interconnection counseling to RHS athletics to for the boys and girls swim team. From Mosey Manufacturing to RHS athletics to donation again to the swim team. From U.S. Army Recruiting Battalion Indy to RHS athletics for a donation to the athletic department. From Michael and Millicent Emery to Civic Hall Performing Arts and the Gannett Foundation to the Civic Hall Performing Arts to the Proudly Presenting Series annual gift campaign. And again from the Mary Elizabeth Powers Trust for scholarships to IU East nursing student. We ask the board to accept the very generous donations of $51,626.12 plus the
$897.07.
So noted. We ask the board. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion? Dixie Robinson, seconded by Jeff Slifer. Comments, questions? Again, thanks. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Our second item tonight is we're requesting approval of a sister school memorandum of understanding. This would be between Richmond High School, or Richmond Community Schools on behalf of Richmond High School, and Hangshu number 14 High School in the Zhejiang province. We had a signing ceremony out here, so I'm really asking you to approve what we've already put in writing. So it'd be more of a ratification than an approval.
Okay.
So moved.
Pat Heine makes the
Second.
motion. Aaron Stevens seconds it. Comments or questions? What was it that the principal said? We're going to seal the deal.
Well, and this is the high school that sent so many students to look over Richmond High School at the beginning of the year. And I think we're going to see some of those same students return.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Our next item is a first policy reading, and I'm going to ask Mr. Millis to talk about this a bit. It has to do with the anti-bullying topic.
As you recall, we previously brought forward what we referred to as an addendum to our student code of conduct. We also included with that a policy that was recommended from Neola. And we, I think, wanted to step back and look at it to see whether or not that's what we want to propose as a policy. We would like to propose it as a policy. We've received some input from Julie Slavin's Indiana School Board Association, and that input was that as it relates to addressing all of the requirements in the Indiana Code, that the policy needs to speak specifically to all of those issues. I think Dr. Borf and I, we modeled this after a proposal that was out there from the Department of Education and the School Board Association. It does not really look like some of the other policies we've had that we bring before you. But at this point, we're going to propose this as a first reading. I went through on a checklist, and it does address all of the requirements in the state code, and there are quite a few. I think we discussed that in detail that evening in terms of what that's going to entail for us as a school system, and that we're really currently dealing with. I know our principals are under the impression that it will look something like this, and they have addressed their staffs, and so they are really kind of following the protocols that are spoken to in this policy. So would ask that this be considered as a first reading.
I'd also like to just interject. Aaron Stevens made the request at the last meeting when we were looking at this that the Neola policy might have something that was appealing to it that the state policy didn't. We have incorporated that piece of the Neola policy into the state policy explicitly. We think it might be a little redundant, but following Julie Slavin's recommendation, it's much better to be just a bit overly done than not to have some of these items addressed. So it answers your concern, Aaron.
Thank you.
So moved.
Okay, Pat makes the motion, seconded by Kelly. Comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Our next item would be approval for an e-learning grant. And here to talk about it tonight is Mr. Tidrow.
All right, thank you. As we continue our progress on the digital conversion process and getting more devices in the hands of our teachers and so forth, professional development is paramount, and we got to find new and unique ways and extended ways to provide that. About 2 years ago, the Indiana Department of Education's Office of E-Learning provided some small grants for regional summer conferences, and we were selected the last 2 years, and they've just posted another one for this upcoming year in 2014, and it's up to, the awardees will receive up to $15,000 to support this. The sessions will take place during June, July, or early August. They like to get these in during the summer months. It is a competitive grant, and it is, has a quick deadline of December 13th of this year. They want to get these in and offer them up so that we can start planning, if we're selected, start planning on maybe keynote speakers and so forth. So I'm requesting that Richmond Community Schools be authorized to apply for the 2014 Summer E-Learning Regional Conference Grant.
Motion made by Dixie Robinson, seconded by Kelly. Any comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Our next item has to do with the approval of a common construction wage hearing for a number of projects. Mr. Coddington, we turn to you for recommendation.
We're requesting permission for the Richmond Community Schools Common Wage and Construction Committee to hold a wage hearing on December the 18th for the following projects for next year. The Westview Elementary School boilers, dehumidification and roof, Fairview Elementary, Vale and Charles Elementary for dehumidification and ventilators. After we have the wage hearing, we'll report back to you on what was agreed upon. Therefore, we recommend that the Board of School Trustees approves the recommendation to hold a common wage construction scale hearing on December 18th as presented.
So moved.
Motion made by Aaron Stevens, seconded by Jeff Slifer. Comments or questions?
Now, this is good for 90 days? Or, okay. So you will have the bids then by the end of March?
Anyone else? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. We are now at the press conference part of our meeting. Anyone from the press have questions? Seeing none, we will move right on to consent items.
Our consent items this evening, did we have a question?
No. They're ready for us to move forward.
Oh, okay. All right.
We are.
Consent items include tonight the approval of minutes, recommendation by Human Resources, recommendation by, from Accounts Payable, approval of the filing of reports from our monthly financial report, also a recommendation to approve a deduct change order relating to our Hibbard work, and Dennis Intermediate School, a deduct change order as well, deduct order number 2. Recommend the above items for your approval.
Motion made by Jeff Slifer, seconded by Kelly Baumgartner. Comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Now we are ready for the second public commentary point in our meeting. Anyone from the public wishing to speak? Susie Hively.
Good evening. Nice to see you all again. I just wanted, as I'm sitting here reflecting a little bit on the earlier conversation about the specialized schools, I'd like to see us set up a framework or a way of going forward with having the conversations, because I really feel that the conversations are where the rubber's going to hit the road with getting things done in the long term. Because teaching, we talk a lot about the art of teaching, and that art is where the creativity and how we present things and how we do things, that's where a lot of the excitement in teaching comes from. And having an opportunity to have those conversations in a semi-structured / informal way, I think would be just fabulous, because when you have the art of teaching in place, that just creates the joy of learning in the classroom, because the teachers are so excited about what they're doing. And the other thing I would remind us of is that when we've done significant curricular changes in the past, sometimes the best implementations have been with a long lead-in of opportunity to have those discussions. And those discussions have been very, very fruitful. I think when we switched to the middle school, we had 3 years of discussions. Some of them were just our own discussions, and some of them were led by outside people who came in to give us, plant a few seeds of thought. I just think that this is a real opportunity for us to foster that joy of learning in the classroom by creating that artful teaching. And that artful teaching happens when people get a chance to cross-pollinate. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Okay, we are now ready for follow-up old business. And I want to take us back to when we began our discussion on student involvement. And I kind of want to give a timeline of where we are and where we've been. On August the 28th, that's when we at least formally had that conversation at the board level. And then we continued that conversation by having follow-up conversation to that conversation. And at that time, we decided that we wanted to hear from students. And so Pat and Aaron volunteered to go to the high school and have conversation with a couple groups of students, which ended up being the register students and the student council students. And then at our last meeting, Pat and Aaron reported back on that conversation. And Pat had written up a list of things that they had conversation about. So I just wanted to remind us of what that conversation was. They talked with the register staff, and that register staff said that they would welcome a routine conversation. They said that they could also do surveys. The editor of the register said that he or she could certainly write articles on a particular subject and may use opinions from students and would certainly utilize board communication in that. They would like to host town meetings with large groups of students, and the student council talked about being a part, or I don't know if they talked about it, but the student council is going to be part of an advisory committee that I believe Mrs. Wolpe is forming. And so, having that, then I did a follow-up conversation with Ray, who invited Corey and Chris to come to that meeting. It was just a way for us to have a conversation to keep this process moving at the board level. and they are here tonight to talk about what they have done after all of these conversations have taken place and where they see this going as far as we're concerned at the board level. So Corey and Chris, if you would come forward and share what you have to share.
Certainly. We appreciate your time tonight. The Student Council has been looking for a number of years for ways to better engage our students in terms of advocacy for kids. And the discussion that the board has been doing over the past several months has really kind of channeled a lot of energy, not only from ourselves, but also from the high school administration and from the kids themselves. We wanted to make you aware of a couple things that are coming down the pipe, just so that you can either participate or at least know they're going on. Following the last board meeting, we met with the Student Council on a Wednesday, and based off of our discussions with Pat, the kids were very interested in hosting a student forum, generating ideas as to what could be improved or what's working well at the high school, and using that as a way to pass that information on to you. We ran the idea past Ray, and she thought it would be a good idea to include the Interclub Council. There's a description of that at each of your seats tonight, which is comprised of student leaders within each of our student activities, everything from band and choir through student athletics. Also, each club has a representative on there, as well as pulling in some other students. At this point, what we've worked up is that we'll be hosting during third period on Tuesday, December 10th, a student forum comprised of those groups. Third period runs approximately 10:17 to 12:01 that day. Again, it will include representatives from the Student Council, from each of the clubs, as well as a handful of other students to kind of fill in some pockets of representation as need be. We will be modeling this approach off of the Raising Student Voice and Participation model, the RSVP model, which is in place at a number of different schools. And for the first topic, the kids had brainstormed a number of ideas. What we'll be doing is spending about 30 minutes having the kids look at what problems they see in their school, going from simple to complex. We'll take a small lunch break, and then after that, the kids will start brainstorming solutions to some of those problems. So, again, we would be more than happy to have board members there. At this point, we're looking at it to be student-led, so we would have individual student facilitators and groups working kids through those conversations, but we'd be very happy to have board members, very happy to have cabinet members attend that as well. And we're also prepared to have the student body president or her representative present the findings from that meeting to you at the following board meeting on December 11th. It's also our intention, if this goes well, to set these up periodically throughout the school year. That way they could be used to cover topics that the board finds needed. So anything from technology to pathways, et cetera. So, do you all have any questions?
Anybody? I think we're all brain dead here.
Yeah, I can shoot an email, not a problem. So, thank you.
Wait, Corey, I
Yes, sir.
have a question. How do you plan to elicit information or insights from students who on normal days would be disenfranchised?
You know, that's a really complicated question. Not just because it hasn't been done, but because sometimes reaching those kids can be very difficult. I think that if you talk to any classroom teacher, they can find those kids who might be disengaged, might be a bit more surly, depending on the encounter. And we know the ones who would be responsive. Kids always want to be heard. Kids always want to have a voice, especially sometimes more so for those kids who feel like they don't get that voice naturally. So I would foresee it perhaps being council recommendations or teacher recommendations, or even asking the kids, hey, who do you think would be a good person to fill this role?
Because I think when I was there with the student council, they were concerned about that as well. The very first concern out of a student's mouth was the division between, and they called them honors and non-honors, whatever, but we're talking about those very same students. And they were very concerned about that, so I think they would participate. What encourages me about this is this should become a model for all the rest of our school system. It needs to be a philosophy of the school system that we listen to kids and that they have a structured way to share their voice. I know we have lots of unstructured ways, but a structured way so that it gets large, so that it has a larger impact. So it's the 10th?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Aaron?
I certainly would like to drop in, but as a board member, if I do, it's solely not to engage in the conversation with them. I want to sit and listen to the
Yeah.
process, and I want to sit,
We were talking about having, some of this we started thinking about with your meetings early in the year when you had small focus groups, that maybe board members or cabinet members could be there writing on the board. So they would be a part, but just listening as they wrote down what the kids were saying, so we would have an adult at each.
yes, because if I think this is something that we've wanted for a long time, but at the same time, don't want to take away that student voice by our presence, because sometimes that can be, the mere presence can cause someone not to really want to speak up the way that they want to, especially if we engage in the conversation. So,
I agree. The English teacher in me wants to throw out a quick anecdote. Emerson in Self-Reliance makes a comment about adults recognizing that the youth in the other room will one day make them unnecessary. And I'm not saying you're not unnecessary, but the point I want to make is that notion, kids actually kind of crave that, even though it can at times be a deterrent when there's an adult or a person in a position of authority in their groups. They crave that connection because they recognize that someday they will be there. And I think it's important for them to have that encounter.
I think we found when we were there that they were very honest.
Mhm,
When you
mhm.
said, you didn't intimidate, just because he had
And
his
I was in
gun.
uniform.
I was gonna say, just because he had his gun. I still don't think you
No,
intimidated
no.
them. No.
Kelly?
Well, I shot you an email to this effect real quick, because I know everybody's gonna wanna go, and are there only 3 of us that can go without it? Okay,
So we can't,
I'm throwing it out there.
Well,
would like
Even though
to,
we'll be in different groups?
you can't, you shouldn't, as board members, be in any one spot, more than 3.
Oh, well, I don't,
we'll sit in
It's a
different
joint
groups.
meeting.
We'll figure it out.
how are the groups going to be situated?
One big
It's a
group at
good
first,
question, and we have no idea yet. We'll get there eventually. So, big broad
Well,
strokes up to this point.
The other piece is, if you just be quiet in those meetings and listen.
Was he looking at me?
That's stretching it. I'm fine with that.
Are you putting a new board in place, or? I know it's late, Dr. Bohr, but
Really
But
are supposed
really,
to
I
be there
mean,
to observe. We
When
really
you,
aren't supposed to.
when you go to plays or performances,
Sure, we all
you're
do.
not there to interact, you're there to listen and watch. And if you treat this the same way, I don't think that there's any way that anyone would
Just
find
to observe.
something illegal being done.
just on the safe side, having different rooms.
Dixie?
I just wanted to compliment both of you because in such a short time frame from talking to this, you've organized everything so well and got the kids engaged and excited, and I think that's really great.
Thank you.
Well,
Will there
I
be somebody from
think
the
the
alternative school there?
really, also the neat thing is that the two of you have been trying to figure out how to get the student council more engaged in leadership. And my hat's off to both of you because I think that you are working in the right direction. I guess, anybody else want to make a comment? I guess I want to ask the board if you feel as though this is the way, the direction that you would like to go with the student involvement piece. Does this meet?
It's like a good start to
It
it.
addresses the
Great
high
start.
school
Great
very
start.
well, I think.
Yeah.
Really, it's
Well, I think it serves two purposes, ours and theirs.
well, we appreciate you being here and being very patient to be here at the end. It certainly doesn't show the importance of what you all had to say, but we will be anxious to hear more about the December 10th groups and where to report and all that kind of good stuff. So thank you. Thank you very
for your
much.
time.
Thank you.
Good night. I have other old business.
Okay.
Humor me. I have a list.
Okay.
And I don't want answers tonight, so that I was sorting and throwing away more stuff and came up with these questions. I don't know the resolution of the Garrison cabin. I'd like to know, this is for next meeting for my swan song. I'm curious about AP enrollment this year. You know, we had all those new AP classes. I'm just curious. I don't think we've seen that report. And guess what the third one is? The student health clinic.
Who laughed?
I have more, but those are the three kind of big things out there. I just kind of would like to know where they are as I leave.
Okay.
Vicki, do you have those 3 questions?
I've got them right here if you'd like.
Dixie?
I just have one question for Ron. How's the Dennis bleachers? Bleachers. Pardon me?
It's on schedule.
Great, okay.
December, what is that?
You ask him every day, Dixie.
I'm fulfilling a promise.
Yeah, they'll be ready for the December
You need my 3 questions.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Have anything, Dr. Ford?
I don't think so.
Okay, anything on superintendent and board reports, reflections, celebrations?
I'd like to commend the board tonight for putting forward your thoughts in the form of this letter to the government officials. I think tonight's conversation with Dr. Oliver was really beneficial, if for no other reason that it just elevated the conversation in the public. I also want you to know that Glenda Ritz called back, must have been last Wednesday or Thursday. She called here and wanted to know what the DOE could be doing to better serve schools. And I thought that was a big positive for her.
And you told her?
I did, and I followed that up with some
Very good.
suggestions that we came up with through the cabinet. I think that was pretty also a healthy conversation.
I think we have to learn from that we can't just sit over here and complain, that we do have to take the responsibility. And he asked for that, and I would love to go over there for that their next meeting. The problem is at the same time as I just got as the students, but it wouldn't hurt for a couple of us to show up over there just to let them know we're watching.
You're right, that would be fantastic.
Well, the next meeting is what, December 4th?
I think you said the
That
4th or
one,
5th?
but then,
4th, oh.
but then they had one other one. December 4th is with their,
The December 11th was the.
December 11th is the next one. December 4th is when they're meeting with those,
Oh,
the
Trainer.
mediator, trainer folks.
So December 11th is their next regular.
And that's actually our board meeting.
Or did they say the 13th?
Dixie?
I wanted to compliment the ESA students on their officer induction into micro society. If you had been there, those kids were so polite and so nice
Respectful to each other.
and so respectful. And this includes the kids who were bringing us in or bringing people into the gymnasium, as well as the audience. I was just amazed at how respectful they were throughout the whole ceremony. So I wanted to compliment them and the whole staff on a really nice ceremony.
Great. That was where they inducted their officers?
Yes.
And the new president's speech was very well done, I thought.
Good. Anybody else have anything for the good of the cause?
Mark.
If not, oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
I'll be brief. I want to make sure that we recognize a great teacher who passed this last
Yes.
week, Mr. Charles Matthews, and I was privileged to have him as a teacher. I know there were many students that went through the Richmond schools. He was inspirational, humorous, demanding, comical, among a million things. But I had the privilege of getting to know him better the last 8 or 9 years as I visited my father at Friends Fellowship. And his impact out there was just, it was huge. And the inspiration that he brought to the community through the theater. The service concluded with a standing ovation. So, just
Wow.
wanted to share that.
Thank you.
I had him as a teacher as well, and I know Mark has spoken for all of us. He was really wonderful, and he had just come back from performing in Splendor in the Grass with Natalie Wood. And also Sue Musial as well, passed. She was
Yes.
a high school teacher. A lot of fun, great with students. And
She was a junior high school teacher, too.
junior high, too.
Well, and Pam Soper also was taught with,
Yes.
in Richmond schools for many years. She also passed and impacted a lot of students. Okay, well.
Happy
we are-
Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving to everyone.